Okay, thank you. The next item of business is a debate on motion 16572 in the name of Mark Ruskell on cheaper rail fares. I would invite those members who would wish to speak in the debate. Please press the request to speak buttons. And I call on Mark Ruskell to speak to and to move the motion. Up to 7 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. And I want to acknowledge up front that bringing ScotRail into public ownership has been a really welcome move by the Scottish Government, and it has put the public interest at the heart of our rail services. But the cost of rail travel is now the critical issue for travellers, and it's time for the Government to intervene, to use its power to act in that public interest to deliver a more affordable service. Now, we all see from our inboxes that rail travel is now too expensive for too many people, that ticketing is complex and confusing. And the fact that rail fares are even higher in England is really cold comfort to our struggling constituents who want to see action here now in Scotland. Now, the return of peak fares in September last year has seen day ticket prices more than double in some cases. A peak time return from Perth to Glasgow Queen Street will set a passenger back £40.10 compared to a £20 off-peak ticket. Meanwhile, those heading from Stirling to Waverley will pay £19.90 on a peak journey compared to £12.10 for an off-peak one. And these are the prices before ScotRail's above-inflation increase to ticket prices of 3.8%. Now, that increase in ticket price will outstrip percentage increases in many pay packets next month, including staff working here in this Parliament. And unless the Scottish Government revisits this decision to increase rail fares, passengers between Perth and Glasgow Queen Street, for example, will now pay £41.62. Tickets that are already too expensive will become even more costly when household budgets are already stretched. And, Presiding Officer, these are eye-watering amounts of money for commuters to be shelling out. Peak time ticket costs are an unfair tax on working people, and they must be scrapped. So while I acknowledge that some better deals are now available with flexi and season passes, these all require commuters to dig deep into their pockets up front. And in a post-COVID world where patterns of work are no longer fixed, investing in a season pass will not be an attractive, convenient or affordable option for many people. Yet for many, it will be effectively the only option they have to get the train. But of course, flexi passes aren't even available on all routes, meaning that some passengers are barred from cheaper fares simply due to where they live and the journeys that they make. But this cost crisis hasn't happened overnight. The price of public transport has been steadily rising for years and years. Over the last decade, we've seen nearly a 70% increase in the cost of public transport compared to an increase in motoring costs of only around a third. So this is a widening gap, Presiding Officer, between those who drive and those who don't or can't, that will structurally build in car dependency for the working-age population who are ineligible for concessionary fare schemes. Working people on low incomes will continue to find their monthly outgoings dominated by transport costs as much, if not more, than energy costs. And of course, bus services may be a cheaper option, and I welcome the constructive agreement we've reached with the Scottish Government over a future bus fare cap pilot scheme. But buses don't always provide the fast connection needed to get to a place of work for longer distance travel. For people with caring responsibilities, especially women, spending hours on a bus or indeed multiple buses at either the end of a day does not fit with family life. And paired with a complex, unintegrated ticketing system, the cost for women travelling by public transport adds up. It is unclear what progress has been made towards delivering an integrated ticketing system that would go at least some way in reducing the complexity and the cost of journeys in Scotland. I briefly give way.
Cabinet Secretary.
I can reassure the member that integrated ticketing is happening, but does the member recognise that 75% of public sector journeys are on bus, and is it the Greens' position that the majority of subsidies should go to rail at the expense of bus?
Mark Ruskell.
No, it's not an either-or, and I think the Cabinet Secretary would do well to reflect the fact that many people use multiple modes of transport, so that integration is critical. And it is disappointing that the government always seems to see rail as kind of second to bus when actually we need to be investing in both. They both do very different things, but for many people, the choices are stark. You either get the train and save time but spend more money, you either get the bus and then you spend less money but you waste time, or you drive if you're actually able to, you spend less but you actually waste more time sat in a traffic jam. So these are the real-world choices that are faced every morning by households, and none of these options properly serve the people or the economy. Public transport should be seamless, accessible and an affordable choice. And I am concerned that rail is increasingly being seen as a premium form of travel for the few rather than mass transit for the many. It seems odd that, having successfully opened a new rail route to Leavenmouth with the objective of tackling economic disadvantage, that now the government is allowing fare increases that will price many people off the restored train services that their communities fought for. During our time in government, the Scottish Greens worked to secure the removal of peak fares through the pilot scheme. It resulted in a shift in ticket prices for peak time commuters, an average saving across all tickets of 17%. And over the duration of the scheme, there was nearly a 7% increase in passenger numbers, and some 4 million extra journeys switched away from private cars. There was an increased awareness of rail too as a viable travel option, with 80% of people participating in that scheme stating they were now taking more trips by rail. The Scottish Government has, of course, scrapped the pilot, citing limited increase in passenger numbers and a lack of modal shift towards rail travel. But we all know that modal shifts take longer than a year-long pilot, and that multiple interventions are needed to support it. Few people would be tempted to move their job or sell a car on the basis of a short-term pilot to reduce rail fares. Long-term certainty is important, and in her amendment, the Cabinet Secretary indicates the results of the Transport for London off-peak trial mirrors those of the Scottish scheme, as proof that our scheme somehow didn't work. But of course, TfL's pilot only ran on Fridays for 13 weeks, which could hardly be called a trial at all. So, Presiding Officer, the spiralling cost of rail travel is an issue that is not going away. It goes way beyond what can be agreed in any budget negotiations in a single year in this Parliament, and we need a real vision for Scotland's railways from this government. But above-inflation increases to complex rail fares that discriminate against workers should have no place in that vision, and that's why I move this amendment in my name.
Thank you, Mr Ruskell. And I now call on Cabinet Secretary Fiona Hislop to speak to move Amendment 16572.3. Up to 5 minutes, please.
Presiding Officer, this Government agrees that we must make public transport accessible, affordable and reliable to encourage more people to travel by bus and train. The off-peak all-day trial from this Government was bold and pioneering, only possible due to this Government bringing ScotRail into public sector control, and was definitely worth trying. However, it did not achieve its original aims of encouraging more people to travel by train. The analysis shows only a limited increase of 6.8% in the number of passengers during the pilot. Consequently, insufficient income was generated to justify continuing it, and mostly it benefited existing passengers on above-average incomes. Indeed, the recent similar reduction in fares by Transport for London also did not see an increase in passengers. Ross Greer warned only yesterday in the budget debate that politics should not be a bit of a game just to get one over each other. Yet this Green Party motion appears to do exactly what he warned against. Day one, they support the budget. Day two, they want to drive a coach and horses through the transport resource budget, blowing a £51 million hole in it. Calling for a rail freeze that they did not ask for in budget negotiations would leave us having to find an additional £11 million. I give way to Ross Greer briefly.
Ross Greer.
I'm grateful to the Cabinet Secretary for taking the intervention. I would encourage her to check the record in reference to what we proposed in budget negotiations. But she knows absolutely the Scottish Greens have put forward a range of proposals to fund every policy that we've ever put forward in this Parliament. Our motion today is consistent with our party's policy over a long period of time. We're trying to be constructive. I find it disrespectful that she's accusing us of playing political games here when we are simply abiding by our own party's values.
Cabinet Secretary.
So sorry, Mr Green, I did ask and check with our officials whether not introducing a 3.8% increase and having a rail fare freeze was part of those discussions, and I was reassured that they were not. Now, if you add that to the £40 million for off-peak all day, you can see how it just becomes simply unaffordable. And also, we're actually continuing to see an increase in passengers on our railway. Passenger journeys on our publicly owned train services are up 4.5% for each 4-week period this year compared to the same period last year when the trial was running. So the ability to move people, goods and services around Scotland and beyond is a key building block to growing the economy, leisure and tourism and making our nation more prosperous. The transport, I have limited time. The transport budget for 25-26 focuses on that, but also on funding actions to help cut carbon emissions, and decisions on how much to support rail are carefully calibrated. We need to balance the necessary revenue contribution from passengers, which equates to about 35% of train operator cost, against the already significant level of public investment required from Transport Resource Budget to operate ScotRail. And I'm very mindful of the cost to rail passengers and seeking to keep fares affordable and accessible. And that is why the increase in rail fares from April in Scotland is only 3.8%, below the UK Labour Government's increase of 4.6%. And we're seeking to keep fares down for regular passengers. I'm limited in time. We're seeking to keep fares down for regular passengers and commuters through the 20% discount on all ScotRail season tickets, weekly, monthly and annual ones, until the end of September 2025. I've also improved the value of the FlexiPass permanently to allow for 12 single journeys for the price of 10, used within a period of 60 days. Now, this provides passengers with a saving of 32% when compared with 6 anytime return tickets. So the Glasgow-Edinburgh return fare currently becomes £21.25. Super off-peak fare return fares have also returned, offering even cheaper fares for those who can travel at less busy times. And last month, ScotRail announced the extension of a digital tap and pay trial, meaning that passengers using the app will be charged the best value fare automatically based on the day and time you travelled. If you make the same journey regularly, Monday to Sunday, your fare will be capped at the weekly season ticket price. So these price and fare innovations are designed...
Cabinet Secretary is about to conclude.
Yeah, I'm about to conclude. Apologies. These price and fare innovations are designed to encourage people to switch from car to train and to simplify journey planning. So these are thoughtful and well-planned interventions we need, not the poorly timed proposals in today's motion, which sadly seem to be more about defeating the government than having a rational and creative debate about funding and supporting rail travel in Scotland. I move the amendment in my name.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. I now call on Sue Webber to speak to and move Amendment 16572.1. Up to 4 minutes, please.
Thanks, Presiding Officer, and I move the amendment in my name. We know that an efficient transport network that delivers value for money for taxpayers is essential for economic and social development across Scotland. Under the SNP, public transport, however, has become unreliable and far too expensive, and unless considerable action is taken, our public transport network will only continue to decline. And you would be forgiven for thinking, given the topic of this debate, that the Scottish Greens would have pushed for cheaper rail fares in their budget negotiations with the SNP, and the Cabinet Secretary just a few seconds ago has already given us the reassurance that those discussions did not take place. And however, it is noticeable that rail fares, as I said, were not mentioned in those negotiations. But we have seen that in return for supporting the SNP Scottish budget, the Greens had a number of concessions around the year-long regional trial for bus fares that will be capped at £2, and also securing the free inter-island ferry travel for young island residents. The Greens backed the SNP budget in return for these transport concessions that failed to deliver for hard-working Scots and allow the Greens to continue their attack on road users. Cheaper rail fares in Scotland would contribute to net zero goals, better connectivity and help the ailing economy. I think we can all agree on this. In the Cabinet Secretary's recent draft transport plan, there's boasts that ScotRail has been brought into public ownership. and 6 new stations have opened up across Scotland since 2020. Yet there were 34% less passenger journeys in 2022-23 than 2019, suggesting that many have shunned ScotRail. Yes, I will.
Cabinet Secretary.
I think the member would acknowledge that there has been a great deal of hybrid working, that people have not been using any form of travel because they've been working from home. And does she recognise the figures that I have just put forward, that there's been a 4.5% year-on-year increase between last year, 2024, and this year, 2025, and the figures that she quotes is back to 22-23, when we were coming through the pandemic recovery?
Sue Webber.
And I'm certain that if we'd had fair fares and less expensive fares, the passenger numbers would be even greater. And despite these reducing passenger journeys, we have got ScotRail increasing its ticket prices by almost 4% in the forthcoming financial year. But this is on the back of an 8.7% increase last year, which means that it's more than 12% over 2 years. And this price will affect all the services operated by ScotRail and means on an anytime return ticket from Glasgow will now cost £32.60. And yes, we did hear that the FlexiPass may reduce this to £21, but that is still eye-watering. I'm sorry, Ms Chapman, if you don't mind, we're short for time. Unsurprising, only 1/5 of passengers think ScotRail delivers good value for money, and polling found that only 46.4% of Scots thought rail fares were too expensive. Yep. The SNP's nationalisation of ScotRail has been a failure by any and every measure. Passengers were promised by Nicola Sturgeon that Scotland's rail service would improve with government ownership, and yet things have manifestly worsened than when they were under Abellio. Taxpayer subsidies, ticket prices and complaints have all soared, while the number of services and passengers using them have plummeted. The Just Transition paper looks like another ploy to make the SNP look like it's doing something while doing little except squandering more public money. There are no projects, no priorities, no timescales and certainly no costings. The Scottish Government receives more money per capita for public services than the rest of the UK. It's high time the SNP showed more common sense and used money to give the public these vital services they deserve at a cost they can afford. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Webber. And I now call on Claire Baker to speak to and move Amendment 16572.2. Up to 4 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Scottish Labour agrees that rail fares in Scotland must be more affordable and be an attractive alternative to car use. And we are committed to removing peak fares as the first step in making rail travel more accessible and affordable, so we can deliver a rail service that works for passengers and increase patronage. Sorry. I recognise the need for investment in ScotRail. We need to make progress on rolling stock replacement and made a long-term investment plan for upgrading rail infrastructure, requiring government and private businesses to work in partnership. However, increasing the burden on passengers at this point in time places downward pressure on passenger numbers as the gulf between affordability and alternatives grow. The ending of the pilot removal of peak fares came between 2 ticket price increases, hitting passengers with 3 price increases in just over a year. And in drawing comparisons with the rest of the UK, the Cabinet Secretary might want to reflect on the inflation-busting 8.7% increase that we had in Scotland last year. Greater reliability is key to increased patronage and revenue, but if prices continue to rise, particularly in the face of performance issues with services, people will just be unwilling or unable to pay them. Household budgets are challenging. The reality is the car is far too often the more affordable option. If we are serious about reducing car use and related emissions, the approach of making other travel options more and more expensive by comparison is counterproductive. The plethora of restrictive, cheaper deals are confusing and complicated, and pressing ahead with ticket office closures does not help passengers navigate the system. The inconsistency in how and when peak periods are applied is unnecessarily complex. The Cabinet Secretary has been keen to highlight the FlexiPass as a money-saving option for passengers, but this does not include all stations or routes. Indeed, only 2 of Scotland's cities, Stirling and Perth, were only recently added. The Government amendment suggests that since the pilot ended, passenger numbers have continued to grow, but the reasons for this can be questioned. Are there fewer service reductions taking place, for example? Is this really a like-for-like comparison? And can we expect this trend to continue in the face of ever-increasing fares? Transport Scotland's analysis of the peak fares pilot is one of the most inconclusive reports I've read. Data was routinely not collected, particularly at busy stations, which suggests that the 6.8% increase could be an underestimation. The costs are not exactly clear, but if the top figure of 40 million is accepted, and the Scottish Government said it required a 10% increase to be cost neutral, almost 7% wasn't far off. Although the pilot ran for a year, it wasn't actively promoted. So how could someone who didn't regularly use the train know if the offer was available? And the majority of it did take place during a period of industrial dispute and a reduced timetable. It was hardly favourable conditions. Post-pandemic, there's an argument that peak fares are increasingly unfair. Workers who have to physically attend work, those who are in retail or service delivery, have to still travel at these peak times, while the middle-class passengers, who the Transport Scotland report identifies as benefiting, often have more flexibility to work at home and avoid travelling at peak times. It is time to remove the inconsistent and unfair application of varying prices that make people pay a premium for rail travel to go to work. While we are focusing on rail fares today, the Scottish Government amendment also mentions bus provision and asks us to consider progress on buses. But the progress they have made is extremely limited. Rather than improving services for passengers, the Scottish Government has overseen a reduction in routes. Bus routes have plummeted 44% since 2006, many of which are critical for rural and peripheral urban areas. Before the Bus Partnership Fund was paused in 2024, it had hardly allocated 5% of the £500 million fund intended for infrastructure improvements. The Zero Emissions Bus Challenge Fund is now scrapped, and there is glacial progress on franchising. With buses and trains, the service being delivered to the public is far from good enough. Getting it right would mean more people using public transport and reduced reliance on cars, but to achieve this, the services must be reliable and affordable. I move the amendment in my name.
Thank you, Ms Baker. And I now call on Beatrice Wishart to open on behalf of the Scottish Liberal Democrats. Up to 4 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I welcome the opportunity to reply on behalf of Scottish Liberal Democrats this afternoon. We believe rail needs to be affordable, that ticketing is too complex, that there needs to be new stations connecting more communities. We're ambitious for rail in Scotland. But it is regretful that this debate comes less than 24 hours after the Scottish Parliament passed the 2025-26 budget. As the Greens, the Government and others have acknowledged, my party approached those talks constructively. We secured big changes for the communities we represent and for Scotland as a whole, and we're willing to sit down and talk through ideas, which is why it's hard to understand the timing of this debate. It's not serious or credible to ask Parliament to back a package of changes that would cost £50 million this year, less than 24 hours after tax and spending plans have been agreed. There's no indication of where the money should come from, and if the proposal is for the money to be moved around in the transport budget, that could mean taking money away from buses, ferries, walking and cycling improvements, fixing potholes. And I obviously have a particular interest in the delivery of infrastructure upgrades for areas less well connected, the rural and island communities who need working, reliable ferries and progress on fixed links. I imagine all parties would be willing to look at proposals if they were brought back to the table for the next budget, where policies can be properly costed, funding identified and priorities balanced. Scottish Liberal Democrats have long campaigned to get cars and lorries off the roads, moving passengers and freight onto our railways as part of a package to tackle the climate crisis. Getting more people and goods onto trains will reduce congestion, improve air quality and help tackle the climate emergency. And that means connecting more communities too. In government, we paved the way for the Borders Railway, a station for Lawrencekirk, but the Conservatives' amendment overlooks Newborough in Fife, where my colleague Willie Rennie has fought tirelessly for a new station. Long term, we need to decarbonise our planes, ferries and cars. Right now, we should also be doing what we can to ensure that where public transport is available, it's a safe, feasible and convenient way to get from A to B. I know that there were concerns about the previous peak fares pilot, whether the government really did enough to get behind it. There is a question about the extent it was hampered by the pay row that culminated in the chaotic emergency timetable that plagued services last summer. Cancellations and overcrowding were rampant. The RMT was among those questioning the methodology used to evaluate the trial too. And there are thousands of real-world experiences out there illustrating the barrier the return of peak fares represents for commuters. On greater affordability, reforms to ticket incentives and discounts could drive up passenger uptake. Complicated rail fares are a barrier to passengers. We have tiered super off-peak and peak fares, further complicated by differing times along parallel routes. Passengers find it difficult to know what's the ticket that will best get them from A to B. Terms and conditions are often complicated, and while cheaper fares might be available, calculating this and finding time to research alternatives is another barrier to rail travel. It's also difficult to be 100% certain that a ticket is the right one until a rail staff member confirms it for you. Passengers would rather avoid this stress. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Ms Wishart. We now move to the open debate. Backbench speeches of 4 minutes. And I call Ariane Burgess to be followed by Claire Adamson. Ms Burgess.
Presiding Officer, imagine for a moment yourself in the shoes of my constituent. You need to get to work. It's rush hour. You check the train price, way more expensive than off-peak, and there's no flexi-pass option. You prefer the train. It's the right thing to do for the climate. It's less stressful than driving. You can catch up on emails, or you can take a moment for yourself. And you don't have to worry about parking. It should be the easiest choice, but when rail fares keep rising, how are you supposed to afford that choice? People in my region face this cost-benefit dilemma weekly. A worker in Elgin has to pay £24 for a peak return, and that's 52% more than if they were travelling off-peak. A nurse in Oban going to training in Glasgow will pay £54. That's over a third more than the off-peak alternative. Or how about a tourist staying in Aberdeen wanting to go to Inverness? To make a day trip worth it, they'll have to pay £70, £32 more than the off-peak fare. And in all of these cases, if they have the option, you'd hardly begrudge them from driving or not travelling at all. Now imagine the alternative. With affordable fares, more people travel. That means busier high streets, more customers in shops, cafes and businesses. There's more access to jobs. If rail is reliable and affordable, people can take up work further afield without the financial pressure of running a car. More tourism. Visitors can choose trains over rental cars, spreading tourism and spending beyond the central belt. More people using rail means more revenue to invest in infrastructure improvements. And the bottom line is this. If we don't get more people onto public transport, we will not hit our climate targets. Audit Scotland has already said Scotland is unlikely to meet its goal of cutting car use by 20% by 2030. Why? Because we aren't making rail a real alternative to driving. And nowhere is this more stark than in the Highlands and Islands. Right now, the Highland Main Line is still mostly single track, and that means a journey from Inverness to Edinburgh can take over 3.5 hours, the same amount of time as in the Victorian era. Driving, it's faster. If we're serious about growing our economy, creating jobs and tackling climate change, we need to make fares affordable and improve journey times. Instead of supporting this, the Scottish Government is doing the opposite. They've brought back peak fares, which the Scottish Greens scrapped when we were in government, and they're hiking fares by 3.8% in April. The Government asks why more people aren't choosing the train. The real question it should be asking is, why are we making it harder for them? We need real action. No fare increases this year. A permanent end to peak time rail fares, simple integrated ticketing across all public transport, electrification and dualling of the Highland Main Line and other lines so trains can actually compete with driving, and investment to move freight onto rail. Because climate action isn't about telling people what to do, it's about making the right choice, the easiest choice. Let's stop punishing the people who want to take the train. Let's stop treating rail like a luxury when it should be the obvious affordable option. Let's get this right, not in 5 years, not after another price hike, but now.
Thank you, Ms Burgess. I now call Claire Adamson to be followed by Maurice Golden. Ms Adamson.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. Perhaps I'll start with a bit of consensus, and I think everyone agrees we want rail travel to be affordable. We want to encourage more people to use public transport, and for most of us in the room, we want public services to be in public hands and for public good, not for the benefit of private shareholders. We want these things because they bring tangible benefits to people in our society. We need these things because people have to travel and we face a climate crisis. In order to deliver on these shared objectives, we have to make choices based on the evidence available. And the SNP government moved to nationalise ScotRail. We walked the walk, while others just talk about it in a loop. Too many people felt the service was not delivering as it had been described in private hands, and our public transport was lining the pockets of unaccountable shareholders. That was not a just or sustainable situation. So the SNP government began a project to deliver a public transport system that is for the benefit of the public and accountable to the taxpayer. People are struggling with the cost of living. That is absolutely true. And that limits the choices available to individuals and families. People who are struggling often do not perceive public transport to be affordable. And that is why the Scottish Government had kept the price rise as low as practicable, while ensuring we can maintain services and continue to invest in infrastructure. Investment that has seen the Borders Railway come back, has seen the Leavenworth infrastructure open up, and has electrified the Airdrie Shotts line, which runs through my constituency. I sympathise greatly with a number of the points made by Green colleagues today. We want many of the same outcomes in this, but we have to demonstrate that this is financially viable, affordable and deliverable. Our ambitions as the SNP and as SNP government could be fulfilled if we didn't have the restrictions of being in the Union, but we have to live within the parameters that are set by the UK. Remember that removal of peak fares pilot was only possible because the Scottish Government took action to nationalise ScotRail. But it was just that, a pilot, a trial to see how the policy would impact on behaviour. It was successful in respects that it saved Scots hundreds of pounds during times of economic hardship. But the reviews showed that the benefits mainly went to existing rail passengers with medium to higher incomes. And we did not see the 10% increase in passenger numbers that would be required to ensure that the policy itself was economically viable and could continue. Without the policy self-financing, subsidies would cost the public as much as £40 million a year. Sorry, I've only got a short time left. The pilot showed minimal impacts on overall car travel. 0.1% of car journeys moved to rail during the pilot. This was heavily concentrated on the Central Belt. These numbers simply have to improve to make this project viable and sustainable. So in 2026, the Scottish Government will invest almost £1.5 billion for rail services, rail infrastructure and maintenance of the network. But we also need to see the uptake and increase in passenger numbers, reduce car journeys to make this a viable long-term solution. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Ms Adamson. I now call Maurice Golden to be followed by Richard Leonard. Mr Golden.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. I want to use my speech today to talk about the role of public transport in general, but first let me address the motion before us and the specific issue of train travel. I will start by welcoming the Greens motion today. It quite rightly calls for public transport fares to be cheaper and more accessible, as well as for the introduction of integrated ticketing, something promised over a decade ago. A survey for the Herald found that almost half the public, 46.4%, thought rail fares were too expensive, and more than 40% rarely travelled on ScotRail. And the latest Transport Scots figures show satisfaction with public transport in general, despite a modest rise last year, is still lower than pre-pandemic. I'd suggest to the Transport Secretary that charging the public more than £30 for a return fare between Scotland's two largest cities is unlikely to help improve those figures, particularly when it's extremely difficult to purchase a FlexiPass at Waverley Station. But, you know, this isn't rocket science. If we want more people to travel via public transport, then we have to make it both easy and accessible. In addition to keeping costs low, we should be doing sensible things, like introducing smart travel cards to let passengers use all types of public transport with a single access card. That ticks both boxes, easy and accessible. Happy to.
Cabinet Secretary. Point about integrated ticketing, but the advice that we are receiving from our Smart Ticketing Advisory Board is that the increasing use of mobiles means the idea of having everything on a card is probably more for the past, and that obviously digital ticketing on phones with a common platform needs to be the way forward.
Maurice Golden.
I accept that and think that for some people, though, a card is still going to be required, but I take that point on board. Our train stations should also be both accessible and appealing to visit. The new Dundee station is a good example of this, but nearby Broughty Ferry station has many issues to address. When the train arrives, only one door opens, which causes problems for everyone, but particularly those with mobility needs. This then causes delays, and subsequent connections in Dundee are missed. There's also a refurbished cafe unit which has sat empty for years, and an underpass used to access the south platform that resembles a scene from The Walking Dead. It's not good enough, and we need a total package to improve usage of public transport. We also need to improve access by extending the Borders Railway to Carlisle, and by opening new stations in areas such as, but not exclusively, Winchborough, Renfrew, Cove and Newton Hill. Likewise, let's put some life back into the railways by reopening lines and stations to serve more communities, such as Aberdeen's links to the Central Belt. Let's dual the main Highland line, and let's get that direct line from Perth to Edinburgh, again making travel easier and more accessible. Cleaner, more reliable and more affordable public transport doesn't just happen. It takes effort, providing options people actually want, making it accessible to them and persuading them to use it. I want to see that happen in Scotland. Thank you.
Thank you. I call Richard Leonard to be followed by Emma Harper.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and can I remind members of my voluntary register of trade union interests. Last month, the Accounts Commission teamed up with the Auditor-General to publish a hard-hitting report on the Government's wish to reduce car use in Scotland by 20% by 2030. They gave evidence to this Parliament just this morning. What they found was that there had been no consultation on the setting of that target, that there is no clear or costed plan to meet that target, that there are no measurable milestones towards that target, no equality impact assessments, that the Scottish Government's arrangements for monitoring and scrutinising progress are insufficient. In fact, the failings are of such a magnitude that they conclude it is not possible to see how the national target of 20% will be achieved, and that it is impossible to understand which interventions will have the most impact on the target or deliver best value for money. Little wonder that their key message is there is a lack of leadership. In this same report, the pilot on ScotRail peak fares is considered as a test case. The Cabinet Secretary hides behind the evaluation report, but listen to this conclusion from the Auditor-General. The evaluation report does not outline the impact of reinstating peak fares will have on car use, or acknowledge that it can take time to sustain positive behavioural change, such as encouraging a modal shift from car to rail use. And as the RMT union has pointed out, that the evaluation report does not assess the impact on passenger use at peak times is a glaring omission. So let me say this to the government. You cannot claim to be committed to cutting car miles when you are driving up the cost to passengers of train miles. You cannot welcome COP26 to Glasgow, declare to the world a climate emergency, raise the hopes of the people, then hope that no one will notice that you have reneged on nearly every one of the undertakings that you gave and all of the goals and targets that you set. The 2030 emissions reduction target dropped, the climate change plan delayed, the spending commitment to active travel axed, the bus partnership fund discontinued, spending on rail down, spending on trunk roads up. So I say to the Cabinet Secretary that these are contradictions that cannot be left unchallenged. These are conclusions that cannot be denied, that this is a calamitous climate catastrophe that cannot be ignored. One of the reasons I am a democratic socialist is I believe that ownership is power. The government is the sole shareholder of ScotRail. It has the power to embark on a bold and radical course of action. And if the Scottish Government chooses not to act, chooses not to exercise that power for the common good, if that requires this Government to be led by this Parliament this afternoon, then so be it. Because in the end, that is our duty, to reverse these proposed hikes in rail fares, to abolish these peak train fares once and for all, and to stop the cuts to ticket offices. To understand that the Government's present course of action does not reduce inequalities, it widens them, needs to be noted. We must understand we need words, we need not just words but deeds. We need clear, urgent action. We need a compelling vision. And I, for one, will be voting for the Green motion and the Labour amendment to achieve that this afternoon.
Thank you. And I call on Emma Harper, the final speaker in the open debate.
Finally, Presiding Officer, I can welcome news that the feasibility study into extending the Borders Railway will get going after some foot dragging from the UK governments, both Labour and Tory. And I hope that when the feasibility study reports to the by then re-elected SNP Scottish Government, the Government will study the recommendations carefully. The Scottish Governments of all parties, they have a programme of rail modernisation previously, and that has been one of the success stories of devolution. Not just in the board. I'm sorry, I didn't have time. I think 4-minute speeches are quite short. One of the success stories of devolution is the rail modernisation, and it isn't just in the borders but across the country. Work that has been built upon and expanded hugely over the past decades, including £20 million for building the Reston railway station in Berwickshire. This investment programme has led to a huge increase in passenger numbers. It is that kind of investment that drives people to choose the railway, to travel, to get improved and faster services, to have cleaner and smoother travel and modernised and reliable rolling stock. And I appreciate the point that we all want to pay less for our train and bus tickets. And if the Scottish Government had the financial resources to repeat or extend the off-peak trial, it looks like, based on the Government's amendment, that this would cost up to £40 million of resource funding. But while our resources are subject to someone else's diktat, I believe we need to get the biggest bang for our buck. I look forward to the refreshed rail decarbonisation plan coming this year, continuing the Scottish Government's commitment to electrification across a huge swathe of our rail network. And on ticketing, customers travelling to or from Stranraer, they were able to take advantage of a 2-for-1 ticket offer from 18th of November last year. That's a £17.30 return for twa folk. There are challenges with the location of the station in Stranraer at the end of the pier where it's currently located. But some people have mooted that there should be a reopening of the Station Street station near the town centre or a newer platform close to the town centre. So I'd appreciate to hear from the Cabinet Secretary whether the 2-for-1 ticket offer has boosted passenger numbers and whether there has been any discussions to review station location, although I know this is a Network Rail reserved to UK issue. Locally, Presiding Officer, in parts of my South Scotland area, there are challenges. Lockerbie Station relies on TransPennine Express, owned by the UK Department of Transport, for the vast majority of its services. ScotRail does not and has never served the station. I have pursued that as an issue separately myself. Lockerbie is a railhead important for D&G and across the whole of Galloway as well. But it is clear that we are being dealt a service that seems to be hitting the buffers with depressing regularity. While ticket pricing to Lockerbie from Lockerbie to Edinburgh or Glasgow is £24.70 return, that might be challenging for many, but just looking at the past week alone, train service shows ticket pricing isn't the problem. Last Friday, 16 out of 30 services at Lockerbie were cancelled completely. 11, less than a third, turned up on time, and the day before, 10 out of 36 were cancelled and 8 were over half an hour late. On Sunday, only 5 of the scheduled 30 services actually turned up at the station on time. I'm sorry, I'm not going to take any interventions because I'm just looking at the seconds left. So it doesn't matter what the rail fare is if the trains don't even turn up at all. So I know this isn't the Scottish Government's fault, though. The TransPennine isn't Scottish Government's remit. But I would be grateful if the Cabinet Secretary could advise whether she can make contact with her counterpart at the UK Department of Transport to prod them about how improvements could be made to the service so that people in D&G can rely on the transport to get to the capital city and to Glasgow and wider areas. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll just advise members at this point we do have a little time in hand and we move to winding up, and I call Sarah Boyack.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. I'm really glad that we're having this debate today because, unlike the Cabinet Secretary, I do think this is not a poorly timed debate. It's an urgently needed debate. And Scottish Labour's amendment aims to strengthen the green motion that we have in front of us here today, because it's important we highlight investment and sustainable investment so that we see ScotRail improving the efficiency and performances of its services. And members right across the chamber have talked about the need for reliability and affordability and accessibility. And those are absolutely crucial. And our public transport services need our immediate attention, given the climate emergency. And as Richard Leonard, in his devastating critique, commented, there is no way the Scottish Government is going to achieve its reduction of car kilometres of 20% by 2030 with what's happening with our bus and rail networks. And I'd be delighted for a sharp intervention.
If this is such an immediate issue and so important, why did the Labour Party not put any of these ideas forward, and why did they abstain on the budget that was only yesterday and come here today demanding urgent action?
Well, I think in the chamber previously, the Cabinet Secretary said that if there was more money available, she would reintroduce this. And there was £5.2 billion additional pounds for the Scottish Government. We're not in government, can I say to the Minister. You don't get to amend every line of a budget. We were clear last month that we wanted to see the peak fares removed. It was a 10% increase in usage needed to generate enough income for the reduction in fares, for the service to pay for itself, and we came so close, 6.8%. Think what more users there would have been with effective advertising, promotion of the opportunities, reliable trains and making journeys more affordable and attractive to rail users, because the reliability is absolutely crucial. We need a more joined-up approach to our rail services too, to think about how people access our rail services, getting a bus to access rail services, as well as walking, cycling or needing to park at a station. And as Claire Baker argued, we need that if we are going to persuade people to attract them to use our railways. And those proposed changes are realistic, and they would give us a more desirable system, simplifying the ticketing process via integrated ticketing. That's been raised by members right across the chamber, simplifying transport fares and banning peak time fares, as well as the proposed increase of 3.8%. Because several people have talked about the cost. Over 30 quid, Glasgow-Edinburgh peak hours. That is just not affordable for people, and it's not going to persuade people to shift from their cars to travel by train. The Scottish Government has clearly ignored the evident desire for cheaper rail fares by the public, as well as by trade union, and the campaigning we've seen for action to reduce our carbon emissions. The Scottish Government missed 9 out of the last 13 climate reduction targets, so we need to accelerate progress, not go into reverse, if we're going to see a 20% reduction in car kilometres by 2030 in Scotland, and that is now less than 5 years. And as Richard Leonard said, we've got a lack of leadership and a lack of action. 3 price hikes in just over a year is disproportionately punishing those who are choosing the train over the car. If the end goal is increased use of the Scottish rail services, public transport journeys as a whole must become more desirable options. And that also means that we need them in the first place. At the Net Zero Committee yesterday, we were discussing the issue of buses. Subsidies. Totally support the over 60s bus pass which I introduced and the under 22s. Really interesting digging into the detail, and one of the key challenges is the reduction in the number of bus services, which particularly impact on lower income constituents and rural constituents. And there is work that needs to be done, because there are so many people who don't have access to railways because they don't exist in their areas. They don't have access to bus services because they don't exist in their areas. So we need more effective public transport. And that will be good for our economy. It will be critical in terms of interconnectedness. It needs to see progress. When Scottish Labour were in government, we increased the number of stations available. We approved new railway lines, Larkhall to Mulgai, Airdrie to Bathgate, Stirling to Alloa, got progress on the Borders Railway, new routes with better connections, making it easier for people to travel by train. That is what we should agree together. Make it easier for people to travel by train, not make it harder, and have bus services that connect with the railway sector. We need to focus on sustainable funding and investment in our rail services, so that it means that passengers don't bear the burden of the shift. When the services are not effective as they could be, they're not as accessible, when services are cancelled. And thinking about this going forward, I've mentioned the climate emergency, we have got to make sure that infrastructure is going to be reliable going forward. And an effective, popular Scottish rail service must be a universal goal for all of us. And it benefits our constituents, it will benefit our planet, and we need that investment now, every year, going forward. And the challenge to the Cabinet Secretary is the cuts we've seen, whether it's in buses, whether it's the rail hikes. That isn't good enough. And let me just say again, you had an extra £5.2 billion this year. We could have seen a lot better.
Thank you. And I call on Graham Simpson.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. It's taken me a long time to get the Greens to see sense, and it's finally happened. The motion from my good friend Mark Ruskell today could well be his application to join the Scottish Conservatives. Though that might not be a good career move. No, everything in the motion has been our policy for years. My attempts to get various transport ministers to deliver cheaper, simpler fares and integrated ticketing may not have succeeded yet, but I live in hope. And Fiona Hislop knows that I'm always here to help. Presiding Officer, earlier today the Public Audit Committee looked at the Auditor General's report on sustainable transport, reducing car use. It says rightly that transport is the largest source of greenhouse gas, and that makes you wonder why we would build new ferries which pump them out. It points to the government's target of cutting car miles by 20% from 2019 levels by 2030, and points out that even now, with just 5 years to go, there is no plan to achieve that. And I'd like the Cabinet Secretary to tell us if the government is still committed to that target, because it doesn't look like it. And if she wants to intervene on me now to tell me, I'll take the intervention.
Okay. Cabinet Secretary.
Of the car use reduction, there's a number of issues at play, not least working with the rest of the governments within the UK in terms of some of the incentivisation for EVs. But in terms of looking at the target, certainly the Climate Change Committee's advice will be instrumental in our assessment of what we do.
Graham Simpson.
Well, I'm none the wiser. Is anyone else? I'm going to assume from that answer that the target is scrapped, as it should be, because the government has absolutely no chance of hitting it, and the consultation published on Monday is just a way of stalling things until after the election next year. To achieve the target, car traffic levels would have to decrease by 4.5 billion miles to 18 billion compared to the 2019 baseline. And the last time car traffic levels were at that level was in 1994. It's not going to happen, and the government should just be honest about that. But it can do the things that we've been calling for, and which the Greens are now on board with, I'm pleased to say, and that is radically improve public transport. Ignoring the will of this Parliament when we voted to end peak fares on the railways last year was a bad move. You won't get people back on the trains by making them more expensive. There's been precious little sign of things improving on ScotRail since it was nationalised, but when you have all the levers at your disposal, then you should at least use them. The bus system is too fragmented and confusing. Now, I've long backed a £2 bus fare cap, similar to that introduced by the last Conservative government in England, not a pilot. We don't need a pilot because we know that it works. We also need integrated ticketing and a smart card system, which can be on a phone, across the country. Other countries are using the technology that I have suggested to the Cabinet Secretary. In fact, you only need to look at innovative regions in England, such as the West Midlands and Greater Manchester, to see how things can be done better. But we're way behind where we need to be. Transport Scotland itself has said to achieve the car reduction target would need an increase in public transport capacity of, wait for it, 222%. There's no sign of that happening, and it won't happen. Presiding Officer, Sue Webber was right to mention Winchborough, of course, in her amendment. A new station should have been planned and agreed before any of the new houses were built there. Why can we not get the simple things right? Now, Mark Ruskell opened this debate by saying that rail fares are too high. We've got eye-watering fares. He's absolutely right. Others have made a similar point. I hope that Parliament backs the amendment in Sue Webber's name and the original motion, and if it does, the government must take notice and act on that instruction, because kicking the can down the road with yet another consultation won't do.
Thank you, and I call on the Cabinet Secretary.
Sir, I want to make absolutely clear two things. Firstly, I wanted the off-peak all-day trial to be successful. This SNP government chose to extend it twice, using scarce resource funding to make it a year-long trial. This was not just a Green policy. Indeed, the decision for the second extension was made after the Greens had left government. But the trial had limited success, and the Parliament simply cannot and should not overturn a carefully crafted and agreed budget for transport this coming year, the day after agreeing it. Now, that budget allows for investment in services and infrastructure for rail and bus, for walking, wheeling and cycling, and in road safety measures like the rolling out of the 20-mile-per-hour speed limits, something I know Mark Ruskell supports. And that's the point that Beatrice Wishart pointed out, that this motion risks this investment. Secondly, I am of course prepared to revisit cheaper fares in the future, but proposals need to be properly thought through and discussed and agreed as part of budget negotiations, not outside of them. And this government wants more people to choose to travel by public transport for work, study and leisure. And that is why we'll invest more than £2.6 billion to make our transport system available, affordable and accessible for all. And I am pleased that passenger numbers are increasing even after the end of the trial by 4.5% per 4-week period this year compared to the trial period. And for the second time, I'll give way to Ross Greer.
Ross Greer.
I'm grateful to the Cabinet Secretary for taking the intervention, but she seems to be suggesting that opposition parties cannot bring motions to this chamber to advocate for our own policies if we agree to cooperate with the government on the budget. That was not a Green budget. It was an SNP budget that both the Greens and the Liberal Democrats were able to change sufficiently to gain our support. If the government is suggesting that we cannot advocate for our own policies once we've voted for the budget, how does she think the government will find any votes at all for its final budget of this Parliament?
Cabinet Secretary.
But I would gently point out this is the day after the budget's been agreed, and it's not a small amount of funding that has been requested, and it's not a small amount of funding for at some point in the future. The demand is for it to be implemented in a matter of weeks in relation to the fare increase, and with a grand total collectively of £51 million. Now, if I can continue, our publicly owned railway is actually performing well. Performance on the ScotRail network continues to be high in comparison to other UK train operating companies. ScotRail's current public performance measure is sitting at 90%, but again we want to see this improved and have set a higher performance measure of 92.5%. I need to make progress. It is quite wrong for the Conservatives to claim that the operation of publicly owned ScotRail has cost more than when in private hands. It ignores, for example, that rail employees did not get a pay rise when employed by Abellio. It ignores that the governance arrangements now are lower than the contractual arrangements required under private sector franchising, and that the overall subsidy now is lower due to rising passenger numbers. It ignores the £300 million is an accounting and adjustment for IFRS to reflect the evaluation of leased assets, as I reported in person in the budget evidence to the Net Zero Energy and Transport Committee. And it also ignores how much has changed in the economy since then, and not least the significant inflationary pressures largely caused by mismanagement of the economy by the Tory Westminster Government that have had to be applied to things like track access charges. And I will hope that Labour, including Mr Leonard in particular, will refuse to support the Conservative amendment that suggests that Scotland needs for our railways is a return to private sector franchising. What I'm sure Scotland's rail employees would welcome, though, is positive reinforcement for the good job they do, day in, day out, and the services that they provide, no thank you, rather than constantly being criticised by some in this Parliament. This government has broadly kept ScotRail fares increases down for over a decade by ensuring that they are in line with inflation or even lower in the case of off-peak fares. And of course, the Scottish Government froze rail fares for a number of years while costs increased. And in the absence of a fares rise, our only available option would be to consider service cuts, which would prevent people from accessing jobs, education, public services, friends and family networks. We simply can't afford to create a £51 million black hole in the transport budget for the year ahead. I need to come to a close. Of course, none of this matters to some in this chamber. They don't reflect on the respective Westminster governments and what they've done in terms of constraining our finances. But herein lies the conundrum for the Scottish Greens. Do they support Labour and Conservatives who continue to talk down Scottish rail travel as too expensive, when there is a narrative that if they continue to do so, they will not encourage people to choose travel, they will encourage them to stay in their car? Now, I'm disappointed that we have to increase rail fares and that the pilot did not succeed sufficiently to allow it to continue. But I won't accept the position of a Tory opposition who doesn't even believe in public rail ownership, But I do believe we need a collective approach that can steer our public services, including our public rail service, through this most difficult and challenging of financial circumstances. I want to do that, and I want to do that collectively, and that is why I call on members to support the SNP amendment that allows us to have the prospect of doing what they want to do, but doing it in an orderly and considered manner.
Thank you. And I call on Mark Ruskell. Up to 6 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. And if I can just extend apologies from Gillian Mackay, who is going to be closing for the Greens in this debate, but due to an unforeseen personal reason, I was not able to make the debate. So I will attempt to close on this debate. And I have to say, I find that a disappointing contribution from the Cabinet Secretary. It seems that actually it's the Scottish Greens' fault that rail fares are increasing and have been increasing for years on years. Not ScotRail, not the Scottish Government, their budget choices, but actually the Scottish Greens. And to be honest, if we're being egged on by the Cabinet Secretary and by Sue Webber and by Beatrice Wishart to go further and not just to deliver a bus fare cap pilot, but to make rail fares substantially cheaper as well, then I would welcome that support. I would welcome that support from Beatrice Wishart, maybe in a future budget deal. I mean, they were unable, the Liberal Democrats, to get the Newborough rail station over the line this year. Maybe working in a more collaborative way, we can achieve a lot more for communities. But, I think to take on board the Cabinet Secretary's criticism and concern here, there is some flexibility within the budget that this Parliament has agreed. Cabinet Secretary pointed out that in previous years, the off-peak all-day pilot scheme was extended as a result of in-year budget revisions, and it's not clear what those in-year budget revisions will look like in the following year. Maybe development costs for the A96 will be underspent, I hope. Maybe other areas of government spend will be underspent so that we can redirect this to actually supporting people who are struggling with the cost of living. And, Sarah Boyack pointed out to us that, of course, the Cabinet Secretary herself said that if more money became available, then off-peak all-day would be a priority for this government. I'm not so sure anymore. But there are certainly more things that can be done to lower that cost of travel for people. And, I noticed that the Flexi Pass, I believe the price of that has been frozen to September 2025. I'm not clear whether there's been a decision to extend that price freeze, but clearly that's an area of very limited spend for the Scottish Government, which could benefit people every day with their travel choices. Now, a number of members have expanded the debate a little to talk about other areas which are important for the travelling public, one of which is ticket office closures, which Claire Baker and Richard Leonard discussed. And of course, the staff there play a vital role helping passengers to actually access the cheapest fares. And many people who require concessionary or national entitlement card tickets can only purchase them at ticket offices or on the train themselves. So there is still concern about planned reduction in ticket hours and potential closures, and still a concern about accessibility with unstaffed stations. Now, in terms of off-peak all day, Claire Baker, I think, accurately described the evaluation report as probably the most inconclusive report that she's ever read. And Richard Leonard also highlighted the fact that there was a lack of analysis about what the impact of increased traffic growth might be as a result of off-peak all day being removed. And I think it's slightly disingenuous for the Cabinet Secretary in the motion to draw parallels with the Transport for London pilot, because London is a very different place. There they have full integrated ticketing, an underground network that spans the whole city and is a low cost. And as I pointed out in my opening comments, that pilot study only ran for 13 weeks on a Friday. So it's just not credible to snatch that and to bring that into a motion and to say this is why off-peak all day won't work in Scotland. There's been some discussion in this debate around flexi passes, and Maurice Golden raised some issues on behalf of his constituents. I'd also point out, if you're trying to get a flexi pass and you're commuting between Cumbernauld to Dalmuir or Lark Hall to Dalmuir, you can't get a flexi pass. There are really limited options for regular commuters, and I think it comes down to the fact that some stations don't have automated gates. They simply don't have the infrastructure to deal with these cheaper tickets. And I've certainly had constituents in Pitlochry who are really struggling to understand whether they are eligible or not for FlexiPass. I think I'm going to have to write the Cabinet Secretary. Most of my constituents who've written to me now are just getting in the car and they're heading down the A9 because they've kind of given up trying to work out how FlexiPasses work. We've had some contributions as well about climate and about that critical Audit Scotland report. Ariane Burgess, Richard Leonard, Sarah Boyack as well. And it is clear that they've said, unfortunately, that we're unlikely to meet that 2030 goal of reducing car kilometres by 20%. And they have attributed that to a lack of leadership where national and local spending on reducing car usage is complex, fragmented and lacking in transparency. Now, I hope that the 20% plan that has been under discussion for years and years with COSLA and councils can finally actually be agreed. And I wish the government well in those negotiations with COSLA, but there are some key elements of that plan which is going to require a discussion in this Parliament about areas which are currently taboo subjects: demand management, automatic road tolls, congestion charges, a whole range of measures which are needed to actually raise the revenue to invest in public transport, to make it low cost or to make it free. And what we see in European cities is that this is normal. Demand management, investing in not just low-cost public transport, but free public transport, is not some green dream. It's a reality. It is happening in French cities right now. They're making the choice to raise revenue, to invest in making public transport free, not just having peak fare reductions or anything else, filling around the edges with complex schemes, actually making public transport free. So to conclude, Presiding Officer, if we're serious about reducing emissions, tackling transport inequality and making public transport the best option, the action must be taken now, but it has to have a big vision behind it, and that's not just about the Scottish budget this year, it's about setting out that vision.
Thank you, Mr Ruskell. That concludes the debate on cheaper rail fares. It's now time to move on to the next item of business, which is consideration of motion 16561 on appointment of member of the Standards Commission for Scotland. And I call on Claire Baker to speak to and move the motion on behalf of the Scottish Parliamentary Corporate Body.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'm delighted to speak to this motion to invite members of the Parliament to agree to the appointment of Malcolm Bell as a member of the Standards Commission for Scotland. As members may know, the Standards Commission is part of the Ethical Standards Framework, and its role is to encourage high ethical standards in public life by promoting and enforcing the codes of conduct for councillors and members of devolved public bodies. It issues guidance to councils and public bodies and adjudicates on alleged controversies of the codes referred to it by the Commissioner for Ethical Standards in Public Life. As members of the corporate body, Jackson Carlow, Christine Graham and myself sat as a recruitment panel on the 13th of January 2025, and the unanimous decision of the panel was to recommend Malcolm Bell to the Parliament for appointment as a member of the Standards Commission for Scotland. Malcolm Bell, who is in the Chamber this afternoon, brings a wealth of public sector experience, having served as a senior police officer, been an elected councillor and convener of Shetland Islands Council, and has held a number of public appointments, including Vice-Chair of NHS Shetland. Mr Bell is a member of the Accounts Commission for Scotland, an honorary sheriff, and was recently appointed as a Justice of the Peace. I am confident he will be an asset to the Commission. In closing, I'd like to thank Ashley, if there is time, Presiding Officer, and whether it's appropriate.
Douglas Ross.
I'm grateful to Claire Baker for giving way, and I just want to add my own praise to Malcolm Bell and hope that it doesn't detract from members supporting his nomination later on today. But I did first meet him when he was Chief Inspector, the Area Commander up in Shetland. He has done great work as Shetland Islands Council convener, and since he's moved to the mainland, he's continued to put a great emphasis on public service, and I can think of no better person to take on this role, and I commend his nomination to Parliament as Claire Baker is.
Claire Baker.
Thank you for the contribution. The panel was unanimous in the decision, and I do recognise that he will bring a wealth of experience to the Commission. I'd just like to close by thanking Ashley Dunn, who served as a member of the Commission from 2017 to 2025, and to wish her the very best for the future. Presiding Officer, I move the motion.
Thank you, Ms Baker. The question on this motion will be put at decision time. The next item of business is consideration of business motion 16587 in the name of Jamie Hepburn on behalf of the Parliamentary Bureau setting out a business programme. And I call on Jamie Hepburn to move the motion.
Move, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Minister. No member has asked to speak to the motion. Therefore, the question is that motion 16587 be agreed. Are we all agreed? Yes. The motion is therefore agreed. The next item of business is consideration of 2 Parliamentary Bureau motions, and I ask the Minister on behalf of the Parliamentary Bureau to move motions 16588 on referral of an SSI and 16589 on designation of a lead committee.
Move, Presiding Officer.
Thank you. The question on these motions will be put at decision time. There are 10 questions to be put as a result of today's business. And can I remind members that if the amendment in the name of Richard Lockhead is agreed to, the amendment in the name of Craig Hoy will fall. The first question is that Amendment 16571.3, in the name of Richard Lockhead, which seeks to amend motion 16571, in the name of Lorna Slater, on Scottish enterprise funding for arms companies, be agreed. Are we all agreed? The Parliament is not agreed, therefore we'll move to a vote and there will be a short suspension to allow members to access digital voting.